Hello and welcome back to Tapping Into It. I'm Tristan.
And I'm Cappy.
Hey, how are you, man?
Hey, dude, I'm doing good.
Good. Hey, so those of you that are joining us again after listening to the thrilling intro episode, you just had to come back for more.
Yeah, more beautiful chaos.
More beautiful chaos. And that's kind of what we're going to start digging into, man, because, life is full of chaos and there's always something. But,
Yes.
I think if there's anything, we're kind of become masters of trying to figure out ways to handle it. And I think there's always lessons to be learned from that. So, I know we both deal with anxiety. That's just something that happens, and we've dealt with, I know I've dealt with depression. I'm sure that you have as well with the panic attacks and everything else. And, it's always interesting to me because from an outside looking in, you never truly know what somebody's going through.
Oh, no,
And I
not
think,
at all.
no, and I think that's fascinating because, I'm not one to really every now and then I think people do know that I'm not well or I'm not doing okay because of something I do post. And it's usually something funny.
To
Like
mask the pain,
the other night I posted this video. I've been playing around with this video editor and I found different things I could do. And one was I could put I could film something and then green screen other things onto it. So it was like I put dinosaurs into the back alley of the theater I work on the other night because I have an hour and 10 minutes where I'm off stage during this show. And I was feeling creatively dead and I needed to do something. And so I put this thing, I went and got a shot back in the alley. And then I put some dinosaurs in it, added some sound effects and things. And it made me think of that episode of Parks and Rec when Adam Scott's character is in an ultra depression and does some stop animation. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember after I posted that, I had a few people reach out and be like, are you okay?
You okay?
Including our mother. My mom said, our son, I worry about you.
And were you like, yeah, me too?
Yeah, me too. I just put dinosaurs on the video. But I think we find ways to deal with that. And I'm kind of wondering, where are you at? How are you doing? Let's tap into that and let's discuss it, man.
I'd say right now I feel like I'm in a good place.
That's great.
In high school, that's probably when I was dealing with depression. And maybe it wasn't a real depression, it was more like teenage angst. Because
Sure.
I wanted to be the emo kid with the swoopy haircut and the tight jeans and the hood, the whole thing. I played drums in a band. It was fine. But so depression hasn't really been my thing, but anxiety, that's been the thorn in my side forever. But I got really good at it. I got really good at pretending like I was okay. So if there was a situation I didn't want to be in that I knew it was going to make me very anxious, I got good at making excuses. Or I got good at hanging out on the side of things. But I feel like a lot of it came out as overly boisterous and
Okay.
animated, and but then that whole feeling empty on the inside, no one really ever knows me, but because I'm so anxious that I'm that's it behind my outgoing personality, that I'm on stage all the time, I'm a musician, all these things. So I feel like that's my story with anxiety, is not really dealing with it at first. And just
yeah.
I'll get through it. And I think too, when we were growing up, anxiety wasn't what it is now. I feel like it's so widely accepted and known now. But dude, when we were growing up, I had tightness in my chest and stuff, and the doctors are like, "Oh no, is this heart okay? What's wrong with his
Sure.
heart? You can't breathe? Maybe you have asthma. Here's an inhaler." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll take an inhaler because you told me to. You'll pop some Xanax because you said try it."
Sure.
So I don't think it was until I was married and at my first full-time gig in Ohio that it really started to sink in, and I started hearing maybe podcasts and reading books about other people who have dealt with anxiety. And I'm like, oh, maybe this is a thing. Like maybe
Yeah.
that's what I've been dealing with. And then when I took another job and had a lot more responsibility, I think I worked myself to death. And that's when I had like, because I would have panic attacks in high school, but like
Mhm.
I didn't really know what they were. It was more like that like hollow feeling. Like I don't know if your panic attacks feel like this, but like I have two levels of panic attack. One level is like when it's almost like you have like this weird like out of body experience. Like it feels like you're in this like giant chamber, and the only
Mhm.
thing that you can hear is your heart just thumping super loud inside your chest. And it's honestly, it's probably your blood pumping through your ears, but like whatever it is, nothing else is around you.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest feeling. But like had that in high school, I've had that since in adulthood. But and then the next level is like where my hands like cramp into each other because I can't breathe and I fall over and I went to the hospital in the ER because they thought I was having a panic attack or a heart attack, and turns out I was just low on oxygen because I couldn't breathe
Yeah.
correctly. Who knew? You have to learn how to breathe when you've got anxiety.
Yeah.
So, like that's kind of like my journey with anxiety. But like right now, I feel like I'm in a good place.
That's
But
great.
it took taking an ambulance ride after
Right.
I was gonna go to a pumpkin patch, dude. Like that's not anxiety inducing in the least. That's like
Right.
one of my favorite things to do because fall is like the best holiday season ever. Halloween's great. But
Yeah.
yeah, ended up in the grass parking lot with EMTs surrounding me, taking my vitals, seeing how I'm doing, putting me on a gurney, throwing me in an ambulance, and taking me to the ER. Um,
Yeah.
so like that's like when I hit the low part, and then there was some burnout dealing with that as well, and like the
Sure.
fallout of trying to recover from like what just happened.
Mhm.
So that's kind of like where I've been. And then
Yeah.
that was kind of the linchpin to like you're like, oh, what does life on the other side of burnout look like? Or like what does taking a break look like? What does rest and like having a Sabbath moment actually feel like in your life? Is it
Well,
possible?
yeah. Well, we don't live in a society though that like really truly, I think maybe it's getting better, but especially in the fields that you and I work in,
Dude, you
you
get
just
like awarded and praised for burning yourself out and like working
right,
80,000 hours in a week.
right. Yeah, that's just it. So like it's a tough thing, man. And well, yeah, we'll get into that too. Like as far as the careers that we have chosen and kind of what they do.
So so that's kind of like where I've been. Like right now I feel like I'm good. So what about
Yeah.
you? Like how are you doing right now versus how you've
Yeah.
been?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I feel like I have seasons of that. But what's something that's interesting right now is you were talking about what anxiety kind of feels like to you, and I echo a little bit to the giant chamber. Here's the interesting thing about what it is for me. There's two levels for me too. One is I feel like sometimes there's like five of me, and we're tripping over each other and not getting anything done. You know what I mean? Like the simplest of tasks could take me stupid amounts of time on any given day because all of these various versions of me are trying to do it and everyone is just like, no, let me do it, let me do it, let me do it, when if I just could just sit down and do it without
Like
all of these other,
do one thing at a time.
yes, it would be great, but right now it's being passed around. And that kind of stems from this. So for the longest time, dude, I would have this recurring nightmare, which my therapist said is not something that a lot of people have that has reoccurring characters. Because I would have this nightmare that I would open to my front door and there would just be this giant frozen turkey out in front that I had 4 hours to thaw.
And did you have to serve it?
Yeah, so there was just giant turkey. We had to thaw it by a certain time. So I would get everybody in the town, as many people as I could together to try to like with blow dryers, with, space heater to try to thaw this turkey out. And we never did it. We never
Ah,
got it done.
that's anxiety
And
right there. Like not
yeah,
getting a task done.
and it was wild because it had recurring characters. There were various characters. There was only one dude that had a name, and he was a black dude named Reggie. He was the only one with a name, and he was the only one that ever talked to me. I still haven't figured out exactly what that is and who that might be. But when I was talking to my therapist about this, he goes, I've not met a whole lot of people that have the same dream and the same kind of things happen with the same characters in it. Like that is a very rare thing. And I was like, well, thank you very much for pointing out that I'm extra screwed up. I appreciate that, Dr.
Right.
Paul. But yeah, so like it manifests itself in those two different versions. Now, sometimes they're very much the same. So like in that giant turkey dream, there are multiple of me trying to do it, and we're just tripping over each other like the Keystone Cops or something and not getting anything done. It's always funny and it's always comedy, and that's kind of how it starts to manifest. When I am getting extra comical, I know that actually what's happening
You're
is
putting a
there's
band-aid on something.
exactly, yeah, that's exactly what it is. And it's so wild to me that that's how it manifests. So sometimes when I come up with like an ultra funny idea, I know that uh-oh, that's my anxiety. But because I'm the master of the pivot, I have found a like natural way to when that starts to bubble up, I just get funny. And so if you ever see me posting extra funny things, know that that is coming from a place of like, it's like self-medicating.
Yeah, self-medication.
Exactly what it is. And it's so wild to me because that's what it is. And there's a period where the depression does get real. And last week was the 1 year anniversary of the collapse that the building in downtown Davenport, where me and Savannah had our theater.
Dude, that could
It
be
was
an episode all on its own.
Yeah, and we might get into that
That's
someday, but I know
insane. But
I'll
it's still
touch on it a little bit.
it's still fresh. It's
It is
still
still
fresh.
fresh, and it's wild because I remember the phone call I got when they said the building had come down. I was there all night that night it happened, trying to do what I could, because we knew a lot of people in the building and we had a lot of stuff in the building and we didn't know if anybody was dead, a lot, all that. And it turned out it did take 3 people's lives. It
Hmm.
ruined countless others. The lawsuits and the insurance stuff is still ongoing and it will be for years to come.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's still a very fresh thing. But on the day, it was a really interesting thing because leading up to the year, there was like a weird, like haunting haze surrounding the whole thing because you knew that day was coming. And,
Mm.
and it was just a weird thing. And I'm kind of happy that it's like past now because it's like, okay, we got that out of the way. Because it's just a weird thing to be very closely tied to something that happened in our community to people in this community, but also to be very personally tied to it. I've talked, about, we had stuff and people lost everything, but we had stuff that most of it we could replace. There were some things in there that were, that had a more sentimental value that can't be replaced. I don't know if you remember, I had this guitar
Oh yeah, that little
that had
little white Fender.
yeah, that had all the signatures on it from where Dad's band would open up.
Oh
That's the
yeah.
other thing. Our dad was in a country western band that opened up for all these artists. We'll get into that
That's a,
too.
that's a wild chapter of our
Yeah,
story.
it is a wild chapter. And so like that guitar was in there. I had a drum set that I really liked that I had for like 15 years was in there. I had this was one of the things, there's so many things, but I had worked on a Broadway production of Godspell years ago. And the first check I got from it, I didn't cash because
Oh.
I was like, oh, this is a cool thing. So I'd framed it. And it was in the back office there because I just really thought that was a cool thing to
Yeah.
like,
Well,
have.
it's like a restaurant putting their first dollar on the wall.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And in addition to that, this is the coolest thing, but I had a autographed drumstick from W.S. Holland. And if you don't know who that is, he was Johnny Cash's drummer
Okay.
forever.
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I had played him in a production of Million Dollar Quartet. I played his name is W.S. Fluke Holland is his name, and in Million Dollar Quartet, he was the drummer at the Million Dollar Quartet like recording, like the famous one that took place at Sun Records. And so I had reached out to him, being like, "Hey, I'm playing you." He has since passed away, but I had reached out and said, "I'm playing you in this show, and I'd love to talk with you." And he did. He talked with me, and then he goes, "What's your address? I'm going to send you something." So he sent me a pair of sticks that he had autographed.
Dude.
And so that was something that was in there that was just like a bummer to lose. So like there were a number of things, and I just couldn't stop thinking about like, man, I was on my way there that day, you know. And Harper would often play in the back area, which we have since learned did collapse. Like her play area was in the back. And so, like, thinking about if she would have been there, if Savannah would have been there, but luckily none of us were there. And the two people in the building that were using it, because they were getting ready to open a show the next week, they had left right before it. So,
Mm.
like, luckily none of our people were there, but they could have been. So, like, it's just a very haunting thing
Oh yeah.
still to this day. And so, like, I've been dealing with that a little bit. So, like, I'm doing fine. uh, but
It's situational.
it is a situational thing. And, this past year has been, kind of that in general. Dude, I'm not kidding you. Within a month span last year, and this is why those dreams come into sometimes, is uh, the theater had been robbed. I totaled my car. My ex-wife decided to move to St. Louis with my daughter, and then the building collapsed. Those four things happened within 30 days.
I'm surprised you didn't like have a stint in a hospital somewhere.
Dude, I'm telling you, I had no choice but to pivot. Like,
And just to,
I
to pivot. And
you know,
I'm sure if you go back and look at that month, you probably posted some of the funniest things in your life
I have been
as a
looking at my
way to
memories.
medicate.
I have been looking at my memories, and there have been a few doozies that I was like, "Ooh, man, I'm
Woo!
surprised nobody caught on." But yeah, it's interesting just how we're able to kind of like pick up and move. And I think a lot of that has to do with because I work in show business, and it is a unforgiving career. And sometimes you're on stage in front of 300 people. You can relate to this. Something goes wrong, you don't have a choice. You just have to figure out a way to get out of it.
The show must go on.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that whole situation is that's exactly what happened. Was that we had a show scheduled to open on July 7th. The building came down May 28th, and that show opened on July 7th, just in a different location. Like, there was no time that I didn't take to like grieve, didn't take to I just was like, okay, well,
Well, what are they
I
gonna
still
do?
have a show, so we're gonna
Yeah.
put this on somehow. And I remember everyone around me was like, "It's okay, dude. Like, if you
Like
have to cancel the show."
you could take a day off. You're like, no, I can't.
Yeah, I was like, "No, no, we are gonna make this happen because I have paid for it. The show is gonna like we are doing this." And I talked.
You are Chevy Chase Christmas Vacation.
Honestly, though, yes, dude, that's exactly. I've made that joke so many times of like, I'm just Chevy chasing my way through all of this because I have no choice. And and for better or for worse, and I've talked with my therapist about it, they're like, it's a very, in some ways, healthy way to just be like, okay, well, I'm not going to let
That
wallow in
happens.
that too long. And I work in a career that's all about rejection and all about failure, man. You see more of that than you see success. And so, in a lot of ways, everything that I dealt with prior in my childhood, leading up to everything that I had to deal with in that very short amount of time, uh, honestly kind of set me up for that moment. I was like, okay, well, what else? Bring it on, I guess.
Well, and
Um,
that's the crazy thing. Like we talked about this when we were planning this whole thing. Like the three of us, the three originals, you, me, and Jared, like we are so stinking resilient. It's ridiculous. Like
yeah.
you would think the odds would not be in our favor.
Oh God, no.
That one of us would be like a drug addict or in prison because of everything that happened. But we're not. Like,
Well, I mean, we'll get into my drug habit eventually,
you know,
but I turned out
it
okay.
was a phase. You're okay.
I
You might
turned
have
out
a twitch here and there, but it's a
fine. Yeah,
phase.
yeah.
It's so good.
No,
But
it wasn't that bad, but
it's just crazy to think though that like, you have always wanted to be an actor. You became an actor.
yeah,
Like Jared always wanted to be a cop and be in the military. He did both.
yeah.
I thought I wanted to be a scientist, and then I became a Christian and a musician, and one thing led to another, and God was like, "Hey, guess what you're gonna do?" And it's just it's crazy that this is where we've landed.
Oh yeah, no, like we've done fine. Like we've done just fine. And it is kind of wild to think about because when I tell people what my brothers do. I'm like, I know it sounds like a joke. It's not, but this is what
Right?
we have. Um, and that's the first thing they always say. They're like, "Oh, that does sound like a joke." And I was like, I know it does, but it's a real thing. And like, we could not be more different in those career paths and some of our ideologies. But I think in a lot of ways, when you start talking, because Jared and I have had this conversation too,
Hmm.
when you start talking about it, you're like, oh, yeah, well, I guess we're cut from the same amount of cloth that we just had to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that, and to our parents' credit, that was our childhood too, was okay, go figure it out.
Yeah.
And
It was,
so,
I have to mop the floors today. Go outside. Don't
yes,
come back unless something is broken or you're bleeding.
yes, here's the hose, here's this, you'll be fine. Get the hell out.
Yeah.
And like in a lot of ways, I'm very thankful for the fact that we had to figure it out. Like we did. And at some point we'll get into all of the pretending that we did as children, which I
Oh,
think
for
has led
sure.
us a lot of us to where we are now too. But I think we were kind of set up for success a little bit as children to be able to deal with all the things because we're like, okay, well, that happened.
Yeah. And
Here
and
we go.
honestly, like I don't know, like thinking back, like if the divorce hadn't happened, like we might not have been as anxiety ridden as we are now. But it's a part of life and we've learned to deal with it or not deal with it or conquer it
Mhm.
or try to conquer it. Like,
Yeah,
it depends on what season we're in.
yeah. It really depends on the day, Uh,
Well,
but yeah,
and
I just
and you were mentioning that you overcompensate with humor. I think with my anxiety, I tend to overcompensate, like if I'm healthy, with just over optimism. Like, oh, we're
sure.
gonna we're gonna put a huge just smiley face on that one, and we're gonna call it good. So, like, I think, like, I don't know, I made a decision a really long time ago for social media, and it may have been something a professor said in college, but like, I only post positive things. Like, if you look at my feed, like, there's nothing negative. Like, I bypass politics and all that junk because I'm like, the world doesn't need any more of that. It needs something
Yeah,
happy. So here you go. Here's something happy. Like,
I have given up politics too. You'll be happy to know. Uh,
well, you had your moment.
I did have my moment, but my moment. So interesting, and not to sideline us again, but
But
this is
it
fun.
happens. It happens.
Um, the reason I kind of stopped doing some of that is because I kind of got quasi TikTok famous for a minute
Yeah.
because of my politics stuff. Because I don't know if you ever saw any of it, but I would play a
Oh,
Democrat
oh
and a
yeah.
Republican.
Some of your stuff was just goofy.
Yeah. And so like I made fun of both sides pretty equally. And granted, one side was a little bit easier to make fun of at the time. At the
You know.
time,
You know.
like the one that comes back to haunt me because I still see it cycling through all the time. I'm like, how did people find this? Was the one where I had taped like a wrench and other metal pieces on my face and had claimed that the vaccine had made me magnetized.
I've
And
not seen that one. I gotta go look that up.
oh my God, I I deleted all of that stuff, but that one is still circulating. So if I ever see it, I'll send it to you. It's really funny, but I kind of got a little TikTok famous in for the wrong. So I was at Walmart one day, and this
Oh
is not
no.
uncommon for me to get recognized in public. Like it's just because of the town I live in and what I do. But this was during the later part of the pandemic. But somebody goes, "Hey, you're the guy from TikTok," and I was like, "This is not going to be good," because I saw the way the guy was
Where
dressed,
are we going?
and he goes, "Yeah, I see you on the conservative pages a lot. People aren't very happy with you," and I was like,
Oh, oh,
"Oh,
oops.
okay." Well, so I was like, oh, TikTok deleted. I stopped doing all of that. But also it was causing so many rifts within like the family unit too. And so I was like, I think it's time to put this to bed. I still think about it every now and then, but now that I work for a television station, I can't post anything like that anyway,
Yeah.
because I work for CBS and Fox.
Ah,
So,
hmm.
yeah, uh, two different sides of the coin there. But yeah, I try not to post anything super negative either. On occasion, something will strike me as comical, but it has a negative tone, but it's still like funny enough. But anymore, I post for my own enjoyment or I post stuff about my child or
Yeah.
some adventure,
Yeah. Usually when I find something like what you mentioned where it's like, oh, it's kind of funny, I'll send it to Emily. Or like I'll just put it in a DM to somebody. I'm like, enjoy that.
Yeah,
It
right.
doesn't belong on the public feed, but someone enjoy that.
Yeah, somebody. I've sent a few things like that to you and Jared on occasion too. Um, but because yeah, it's just it's a waste. I'm not going to change anybody's mind by me posting about something. So like, it's just and at this point, everything's so batshit crazy anyway that it is what it is, right?
Well,
Um,
pretty much anything you do these days, there's some video out there of someone saying that it's crazy. Like, oh, you drink
oh,
milk? Milk is going to kill you. You drink
milk.
coffee? Why do you drink bean juice? Like okay,
Coffee's
like
gonna ruin the democracy. Yeah,
yeah.
like everything. There's a story for everything. Um, but it's interesting, that we have had these like bouts with this anxiety, but we're able to recognize what it is. And I think that's a very healthy place to be. So
Oh
I
yeah.
guess to come back around, I guess I'm in a fine place given the circumstances. How about
Oh,
that?
dude, like I'm like I said, I'm amazed you're standing with like just the stuff you went through last year. Like that's just bonkers crazy.
Well, I think part of it though, dude, is, I have always been an actor and I'm always able to just go for a couple hours, 5, 6 nights a week and become somebody else. So I can kind of escape what I'm dealing with, which I think is a very healthy thing to do. Because I know on one hand, you can look at that and be like, well, that's unhealthy to just pretend to be somebody else for a couple hours. But for me, it's like a break. Like I get to go pretend to be somebody else. Like I'm not that. And it's great. It's like an escape. And last
Well,
summer when all
it's
that
like an intentional pause for you.
yes, well, that's just it. And so like when everything happened, dude, I was doing a show at Circa and then I did a show at a black box theater. Then I ended up in Glass Menagerie, which was the show we were opening on July 7th that I refused to cancel. I ended up in it because a friend of ours was having some personal issues and needed a bail. But it was a great thing for me to have that always somebody different to kind of just like tap into. Haha, look at
Ah,
that.
wait, yeah, look at that.
Um, but I was able to kind of tap into it and be somebody else and disassociate from what the realities I was dealing with. And it was a very cathartic thing, especially doing Glass Menagerie. The character I was playing in that really goes through a lot. And so I was able to kind of like almost put myself into that and go through all those things as that character, but everyone knew it was me. There was, there was so many moments. I think back to those two projects, which is Hello Dolly and the Glass Menagerie, where both those characters have these moments where they're like, look, I have lost a lot and here I am and I have to deal with it. And I was like, man, this is so like art imitating life, imitating art situation that, yeah. So I think, we're both artists and we find ways to like express things that are going on within the performance. I'm sure that happens to you with music as well.
It happens with music, but like you were talking about like how it was almost like a cathartic thing for you to like be someone else on the stage. I've kind of like taken it where like I'll use it as an intro to a song that we're doing in the church.
Uh-huh.
Like I dealt with this.
Oh,
Like
sure.
maybe you're dealing with this too, but like this song speaks to this. Like so let this song like encourage you whatever you're going through. Or like I'll
Sure.
use it for like I used to do the communion meditations a lot at our church.
Uh-huh.
And so I would like after I had that panic attack where I was laying on the ground, like I like walked down on the stage and like sat down on the stool because our lead pastor likes to preach from a stool when he gets like if you sit on the stool, something's getting really like serious and like once the one on
Okay.
one. So like I
Sure.
sat on the stool and I was just like, hey, look, this is what just happened. And like I went like into detail with it. And then I like kind of gave it the spin of like, like, and when you're down in the lowest, like think about what Jesus went through. And like I kind of like went into that and like transitioned into communion. Like, so it's like I use stuff that I go through is like transitional moments, or I'll use it as an illustration in a sermon, um,
Sure.
which I do. Or I might even like on my Scrappy Worship Leader page thing on Instagram, like sometimes I'll use like something that I'm going through. It's like, hey, and this is an illustration of how you can be a better worship leader because this is how I screwed up. Don't do that. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
so like I don't know, it's just trying to find ways like that to I don't know, just like express it and get it out.
Mhm.
And now, with the manuscript I wrote, I put a lot of it into that because I deal with a lot of anxiety and stuff in that manuscript. But I think just trying to find healthy ways to talk about it. Um, whether that's like what you said, like acting, or using it as a
Yeah.
transition moment, or just writing about it, or making some sort of Instagram reel or something like where you can spin a
Yeah.
positive and like let people know like
Yeah.
it's okay. Like I've been through this, but this is what I learned.
Yeah. And for me, it always comes back to it's always performance based, man. Like there's always like if I'm feeling down, I want to laugh and I want to make myself laugh. And if I can find a funny way to do that or a creative way, sometimes it's just about diving into something creative, like the dinosaur thing I was talking about. Like
I think that's great.
it took me a minute to do that. So like it focused my energy onto something creative. So no longer was my brain in these shattered pieces where each little piece is worrying about all of these various different things. It allowed my brain to kind of come back together and focus on one singular thing and kind of helped recompose me, if that makes sense.
No, and it helps to have a project. It helps to have something to give yourself focus on, because like, dude, like anxiety for like we've talked about this, like on airplanes. I am like
Yes.
I'm like Zen tappy because I have no control. I am not a pilot. If this thing starts to go bad, what am I going to do? Get on the
Yeah.
headset and hope they can teach me what to do? No, I'm going to trust the pilot and the co-pilot. I have there's no control. And control's a big issue for me. But like, you gotta let it go.
Dude, I'm with you. I'm the most relaxed on a plane. I love flying because I'm like, well, I have nothing. I can't control this. I have
I,
nothing to do with this.
I'm not a
I
doctor. You can't even call
Nope.
on me if something happens.
Nope. Like Savannah gets so nervous and she hates flying. And Harper and I are very much like, we're
Eh,
good. We're already watching a movie before we even take off. She like braces herself until after we're like 30,000 feet in the air. And then she kind of relaxes a little bit. But like Harper and I are like already like Zen. We're already like ready to go. Who cares? Like we don't care about turbulence. We don't care about anything because we're like, we have nothing to do with this. There's no control. There's no responsibilities here. We are done. And I used to be, and I know you can relate to this, is when I would go on a vacation or like I wouldn't stop working. I would work at the airport, I'd work on the plane, I'd work sometimes on vacation and I would now, man, I hit the airport and unless it's something I absolutely have to handle, I am done. I do not care. I will write sometimes. Like when I was in Hawaii, I wrote like a short film, because
Oh
I was
yeah.
like, oh, this is a really good idea.
When I was
You
in
know?
Hawaii in December, I went outside in the morning with a cup of coffee. I was like writing my book, looking at the mountains.
Yeah.
Like it was great.
Right. Yeah.
But no, I'm the same way. I used to like, oh man, like my brain would be like constant going like, oh, when I get back, I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to remember to do this, I got to write
Yeah.
this down. And now it's like I get on my email app and I'm like, turn off, turn off, turn off. I set little things that are like, so if someone emails me, they get the auto reminder like, I'm out of the
Yep.
office, call this person, I ain't doing nothing.
Yeah.
Or like if I'm leaving the country, I will text people and be like, I won't have cell service. Don't you good luck. Like you can't reach me. Sorry.
Yeah, I was shocked when I sent you your happy birthday text that you even responded. I didn't think I'd get a response from you until you
The
came
only
back.
way, and I mean, it is if there's free Wi-Fi in the
Oh,
Airbnb.
sure.
Because like one of our phones will always have service, and we usually use Emily's because like she might get a family member that texts her. But like for me, like sometimes I'll get people from work who text me like just forget that I'm out, and I'm like I don't want to
You're
deal with
right.
that. But
Mhm.
if I'm on Wi-Fi, like most people with iPhones can like sneak through every now and
Yeah.
again. Um, but there was like times where we were driving, I didn't have Wi-Fi. There was one hotel that we stayed in. It was like an off the grid thing. Like it was an interesting experience. We probably won't do something like that again. But I had no cell service for like 2 days.
That's great.
It's fantastic.
Well, that's why I loved being in Hawaii because I was so far away and the time difference was so vast from the Midwest that I was great. Nobody was bothering me.
Yeah,
Nobody,
it's not like
I
you can
was,
quickly come to the office.
yeah, right. I was like, no, you guys had to produce that show by yourself this week. So good luck,
No,
everybody.
figure it
Um,
out and don't call me.
Yeah, except for I just kind of pre-produced most of the show before I left, so they didn't have to do a whole lot. So I just
Uh,
worked like double. You know how that goes.
oh
But
man, going on sabbatical was probably the worst thing I ever had to do preparing for it. Like
oh, dude,
sabbatical was
yes,
great, but like I had 7 weeks worth of things that I had to make sure were going to get done
right,
correctly before I
right.
left for 7 weeks. on top
Yeah.
of doing my job, which comes every week. Sunday is always coming. It's
Yeah.
always there.
Well, it's like, my job, we do a half-hour TV show every single day. So like
Yeah,
the 3
it's
weeks I was
always there.
gone, I was like, the 3 weeks I was gone, there still had to be a show. So like I remember leading up to that, I worked so many hours trying to just make sure that everything was good. And so, but yeah, we'll get into that too, because at some point we'll talk about vacations and just like our lives. But this is, I think, a good place to kind of end the anxiety, aspect of things, is just being able to recognize that, and just how do you, you know, funnel it into something non-destructive.
Yeah, and honestly, if you're listening to the podcast or you're watching and you have questions, like shoot us questions. Like if you want to know a little bit
Yes.
more about certain anxiety things, like we will be happy to go there. Or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll just say no, thank you very much.
And
But
then
yeah,
we'll
this
do it
was,
anyways.
yeah, but this was great. I think we're finding this groove and trying to figure this out. I know it's going to meander, and
It's
thank
gonna be
you all
great.
for hanging with us in our
Just
meandering. But
stick with
that's
it.
part
It's
of the
beautiful. It's beautiful chaos. There will
yes,
be
yeah,
gold nuggets that you can mine out of this. We promise.
absolutely. That is all part of the experience, honey, as Clark Griswold would say. So, so always a pleasure to chat with you, man.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Yes, and thank you for tapping into it today. And we'll see you next time.